Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive.
The war had ended, but the echoes of it still lingered in the cobbled streets of Diagon Alley and the trembling halls of Hogwarts. The dark mark had long since faded from the skies, yet its shadow lived on in the hearts of those who had seen it burn. The wizarding world was healing, yes, but healing came with scars. Hermione Granger walked briskly down the corridor of the newly restored Ministry of Magic, her footsteps sharp against the marble floor. She had changed since the war. Not in the way that people spoke of with pity or admiration, but in quieter ways. There was a stillness in her eyes now, a steadiness that came from having seen too much. Her hair was still a wild halo, untamed as ever, and though she smiled when she needed to, her smiles rarely reached her eyes. She worked now for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the same department that had once hunted down those loyal to Voldemort and now hunted down the remnants of them. It was not glamorous work, but it was necessary. Every week brought new reports, caches of cursed artifacts, sightings of masked wizards, whispers of a new name, the Serpent's Shadow. Hermione did not believe in legends anymore, but this one kept her awake at night. That morning, as the sun filtered through the glass dome above the atrium, she received a parchment sealed with the gold crest of the head Auror. She broke it open at once, eyes scanning the brief message. Granger, report to Level 2, Office 14. New assignment, urgent. No signature, just that. She arrived at the appointed office to find 2 chairs, 1 table, and a man she never thought she would work with again. Draco Malfoy sat by the window, the morning light slanting across his pale face. His wand hand twitched as if it missed its old weight, though she knew his wand had been destroyed years ago. His hair was shorter now, tidier, and his robes plain black, without the proud silver embroidery of his youth. But his eyes, gray, cold, uncertain, were the same. "Granger," he said softly, standing. "Malfoy." Her voice was careful, measured. "I wasn't told who my partner would be," he said, half a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "Had I known, I might have dressed for the occasion. You're lucky I didn't hex you before walking through the door." He chuckled, though the sound carried no warmth. "Still all fire, I see." The door swung open behind them before Hermione could reply. It was Kingsley Shacklebolt himself. Tall, calm, his deep voice steady as ever. "You've both been assigned to a joint investigation," he said without preamble. "Intelligence suggests the Serpent's Shadow is more than a rumor. We have reason to believe its members are operating inside the Ministry, using old connections, manipulating records, erasing trails." Hermione frowned. "And why is he," she nodded at Draco, "involved in this investigation?" "Because," Kingsley said gravely, "we believe the faction may be using the Malfoy name to recruit." A tense silence fell. Draco's expression darkened. "You think I'm leading them?" "No," Kingsley replied. "But others do, and if we are to find them, we need someone who understands how they think. Someone they might trust." He looked between them. "That's why I need both of you. One who knows the law, one who knows the dark." Hermione's jaw tightened. "You're asking me to trust him?" I'm asking you, said Kingsley, to find the truth. And with that, he left them in the still air of the office, two old enemies bound by a fragile mission. For a long time, neither spoke. Hermione stood by the window, watching the busy workers below, while Draco stared at the table, his hand brushing the edge as if to ground himself. Finally, he said, "You don't believe I've changed, do you?" Hermione turned to him. "I believe people can change," she said, "but not everyone does." He gave a small, wry smile. "Fair enough." Their first lead came that afternoon. A report from Nocturne Alley, a backroom shop selling cursed trinkets, had been raided, the owner gone missing, and carved into the door, in deep green fire, was a symbol. A coiled serpent around a skull. Hermione and Draco arrived under the cloak of dusk. The alley was quieter than usual. Its shadows stretched long and thin, whispering of secrets. The air smelled of damp stone and burnt potion. They moved carefully, wands drawn. Inside the shop, the air was thick with dust and decay. Shelves had been overturned, glass shattered, and in the center of the floor lay a single parchment. Hermione picked it up with the tip of her wand, murmuring a preservation charm. A list of names, old Death Eaters. Some crossed out, others not. At the very bottom, in ink darker than blood, was written, "The heir shall rise from ash." Hermione looked up. "What does it mean?" Draco's face had gone pale. "It means," he whispered, "someone's trying to finish what Voldemort started." And before Hermione could ask more, there was a sound outside, the faint crack of apparition. They turned toward the door just as green light flared against the glass. "Get down!" Draco shouted. The window shattered. Curses filled the air, green, red, gold, colliding in bursts that shook the floor. Hermione dove behind a shelf, firing back. Draco moved beside her, his spells precise and quick. Then, silence. The attackers were gone. Only the echo of the fight remained. Hermione lowered her wand, breathing hard. "They knew we'd come?" Draco nodded grimly. "Which means there's someone inside the Ministry feeding them information." Their eyes met. For the first time since the war, Hermione saw something in him that was not arrogance or cruelty, but resolve. And in that dim, broken shop, amid the ashes of old darkness, their uneasy alliance truly began. Rain fell over London like a curtain of silver threads, blurring the lamplight and washing the soot from the bricks. By nightfall, the Ministry stood as a citadel of light amidst the gloom, tall, solemn, and restless. Inside its endless corridors, Hermione and Draco sat in silence within the department's secure chamber, reviewing the evidence gathered from the shattered shop in Nocturne Alley. Hermione's quill scratched softly against parchment as she copied the strange phrase once more. "The heir shall rise from ash." Draco paced the length of the room, cloak whispering with each turn. "You know what they mean by heir, don't you?" he said at last. "It's not just a title, it's a symbol. Voldemort called himself the heir of Slytherin, and there were those who believed the bloodline didn't die with him." Hermione didn't look up. Superstition and fear, the pure blood ideology, was built on lies. "Lies," he muttered, "that people still kill for." A knock came at the door, and Auror stepped in. A young woman Hermione barely knew. "We've confirmed the owner of the shop, Matthias Blott, was found this morning near the Thames, dead. There was a mark on his arm, a serpent coiled around a skull, branded, not conjured." "Branded?" Hermione repeated, frowning. "Yes, ma'am, burned into the skin." The woman hesitated before leaving. The door shut softly behind her. Hermione exhaled, setting down her quill. They're branding their followers now. It's deliberate. A mockery of the dark mark. Draco leaned against the table. Or a promise that the mark lives again. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, there was a flicker of something between them. Not trust, not yet, but an understanding that they were standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. Then we find who's behind it, Hermione said firmly, rolling up her sleeves. Starting with Blott's ledger, every buyer, every sale, every shipment. For 2 days and nights, they combed through files, names, and coded transactions. They barely spoke, except to exchange findings. Draco was quick, clever, unnervingly precise. And despite herself, Hermione began to see the man he had become rather than the boy she had known. He no longer sneered. He no longer spoke to wound. When he smiled, it was faint, fleeting but real. By the third night, the trail led them beyond London, to a place that neither had visited since the war's end, Wiltshire to Malfoy Manor. Hermione hesitated when they arrived before the tall wrought iron gates. Even under the moon's pale glow, the estate carried an air of haunted majesty. Its windows gleamed like watchful eyes. Its lawns stretched dark and endless. "You still live here?" she asked quietly. Draco's gaze swept across the manor. "For now, it's emptier than you'd think." The ward shimmered as they stepped through, recognizing the air of the house. Inside, the grand corridors were silent save for the soft echo of their footsteps. The portraits on the walls stirred as they passed, long-dead ancestors muttering disapproval under their breath. In the drawing room, Draco paused. Hermione followed his gaze to a spot on the floor, faint burn marks still visible in the marble. "That's where she stood," he said softly. "Bellatrix, the night she—" He stopped himself. Hermione knew what he meant. She remembered the screams that had echoed through that room years ago. "I don't expect forgiveness," he murmured, "but I won't let that name rise again." Before she could answer, a sudden whisper stirred the air, the faint shimmer of an enchantment breaking. The fireplace flared green, and a voice spoke through the flames. "You should not have come here." Draco drew his wand. "Who's there?" The flames twisted into the image of a man, hooded, face obscured. "The shadow sees you, Malfoy. The blood you carry was never yours to cleanse. The air remembers." "Show yourself," Draco barked. The apparition only laughed, a dry, hollow sound that made the air grow colder. Then it was gone, leaving only embers and silence. Hermione knelt by the hearth, muttering an incantation. The remnants of the flu spell glimmered faintly, revealing a trace signature. They used a ministry channel. This came from inside. Draco's eyes narrowed. So there is a traitor. They left the manor that night with more questions than answers. But as they walked through the shadowed fields, Hermione noticed how he carried himself, cautious but not cowardly, burdened but not broken. They returned to London before dawn, only to find the ministry in uproar, papers scattered across the floors, officials whispering frantically. An explosion had struck the archives during the night, the very department where war records were kept. Hermione ran to the ruins, smoke curling around her boots. "All evidence from the trials?" "Gone," she whispered. "Every record of Death Eater confessions destroyed." And on the blackened wall, a message had been scorched in runes, Only the old, pure-blood families would understand. Draco translated softly. The past is cleansed. The air is free. That night, the city held its breath. The wizarding world trembled on the edge of fear once more. Hermione and Draco worked in secret, following faint leads through the underbelly of wizarding Britain, disused flu networks, forgotten tunnels, hidden meeting places once used by Voldemort's followers. In those dark corners, they found whispers of a name, Cassius Warwick, a former Death Eater believed to have perished during the Battle of Hogwarts. But Draco knew him. He was no leader, he said. Warwick was a coward, a follower, unless someone else is using his name, Hermione finished grimly. The trail led them to a derelict manor near Dartmoor, abandoned since the war. They entered cautiously, wands lit. The air was thick with dust and a faint scent of iron. On the long dining table lay old parchments and maps, each marked with the same sigil, the serpent and skull. Then Hermione saw it. A photograph half buried under parchment. It showed a group of wizards, cloaked and masked, standing in the ministry's atrium. At the center was a tall man with pale hands and a serpent ring on his finger. Draco froze. That ring, that was my father's. Hermione's blood ran cold. Then someone's been in your home. A sudden sound from the corridor, the creak of a floorboard. They turned. A figure emerged from the shadows, wand raised. Draco reacted first, shouting, "Expelliarmus!" The wand flew from the intruder's hand, a ministry auror uniform catching the light. "Stop!" Hermione cried, stepping forward. But too late, the man fell, stunned. She knelt beside him, whispering a spell to reveal his identity. The glamour melted away. The face beneath was pale, familiar. One of Kingsley's senior investigators. "Merlin's beard," Hermione breathed. "He's one of them." Pinned to his cloak was a serpent pin glinting faintly green. Draco looked to her. "They're inside the ministry already." Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, and far away, in some secret place, a serpent stirred in its sleep, waiting for the moment to strike. The rain had not ceased. It fell like the weeping of an old sky, washing over the spires of London, seeping through the cracks of the wizarding world's fragile peace. Beneath that unending storm, Hermione and Draco stood in the dim chamber where the traitor lay unconscious. The soft glow of wand light flickered across his face. A man she had once trusted, a ministry investigator named Conrad Avery. Hermione's voice trembled with quiet disbelief. "He was at Hogwarts during the war. He helped us rebuild. He swore loyalty to Kingsley himself." "People swear all sorts of things when they want to survive," Draco said darkly. His wand hovered, its tip burning with cold white light. The serpent pin on his cloak. It's no mere decoration. Look closer. Hermione knelt, muttering a revealing charm. The pin shimmered, then shifted, its surface rippling like living metal until a faint inscription appeared beneath the serpent's coils. Ancient runes. Slytherin's sigil. "It's enchanted," she murmured. "A binding mark. Whoever wears it isn't just serving the shadow. They're bound by it. This wasn't loyalty. This was control." Draco's jaw tightened. "And whoever forged it must be powerful. Dark magic of this kind hasn't been seen since..." He trailed off, unwilling to finish. "Since Voldemort. Before dawn, they brought Avery to a secure cell deep beneath the ministry." Hermione stood behind a veil of protective charms while Draco interrogated him. It was strange, watching him work. Calm, poised, no longer the boy who had once sneered through every defense lesson. He knew the language of fear, but now he wielded it with purpose. Avery woke, groaning, eyes wild and unfocused. His skin was pale as parchment. Draco stepped closer. "Who commands the serpent's shadow?" Avery laughed weakly. "You think I'd tell you, Malfoy? The air knows your name. You'll burn before he spares you." Draco's wand twitched. "You serve a ghost, Avery. Voldemort's gone. There's no air, only fools chasing his shadow." But Avery's smile widened, cracked and trembling. "You'll see him soon enough. The air doesn't need blood to rise. He needs memory. And you, Draco Malfoy, carry plenty of those." His eyes rolled back. The serpent pin on his chest pulsed once with green fire, and in the next instant Avery's body went still. Smoke rose from the mark, filling the air with the smell of burnt iron. Hermione covered her mouth. "The pin killed him? It's a fail-safe. Someone didn't want him speaking." Draco turned away, jaw clenched, fury cold and sharp in his eyes. "Then we find the one who made it." The next days passed in a blur of coded messages. Late-night meetings and sleepless hours beneath candlelight. Hermione and Draco were moved to a secret base, a safe house above an abandoned apothecary in Hogsmeade. There, among shelves of forgotten potions and dried herbs, they pieced together fragments of the Shadow's Reach. Each clue led deeper into the past. Each whisper led closer to the truth that someone was trying to resurrect an old order through the bloodlines of Slytherin himself. Draco worked in silence, his quill scratching across a map strewn with red ink. "These attacks aren't random. They're targeting families who testified at the trials, witnesses, Aurors, anyone who saw the old world fall." Hermione rubbed her eyes. "And the Ministry can't stop them, because the Ministry is them. If half our leads are compromised, we're walking blind." He looked up at her then, weary but resolute. "Then we don't use the Ministry. We find them our own way." Hermione hesitated. "Outside the law?" A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "For once, Granger, you might have to break a few rules." Their search led them north, beyond the whispering forests of Yorkshire, to a ruin said to have belonged to Salazar Slytherin's descendants. They traveled by night, their boots sinking into moss and mist. The ruins loomed ahead, arches of black stone swallowed by ivy, their walls carved with serpentine runes that shimmered faintly under moonlight. "It's beautiful," Hermione murmured. "It's cursed," Draco said flatly, raising his wand. "Stay close." The air inside was thick with enchantment, old, heavy, and watchful. Dust lay untouched for centuries. In the center of the crumbling hall stood a pedestal carved with the same sigil they'd found in Nocturne Alley. A serpent coiled about a skull, its eyes made of emerald glass. Hermione approached slowly, murmuring a detection charm. The emerald eyes flickered, alive for an instant, then dimmed again. Beneath the pedestal was a line of ancient script. "When the serpent sleeps, the air shall dream. When the air dreams, the serpent shall wake." "It's a prophecy," she whispered. Draco's expression hardened. "And a warning." He brushed dust aside and found something else. A symbol burned into the stone, newer than the rest. The letter M, twisted, stylized, the curve of a serpent through its center. "Malfoy," Hermione breathed. Draco stepped back as though struck. "No, this wasn't me. I swear it." "I know," she said quietly, "but someone wants it to look like you." Before he could answer, a tremor shivered through the ruins. Stones shifted. The floor beneath them rippled with dark light. "Trap," Draco hissed. They barely leapt aside as the pedestal split open, revealing a burst of emerald fire. From within rose a figure, not flesh, not ghost, but shadow given form. Its voice was a hiss of silk and ice. Blood of the serpent, mind of the lion, both chained by fate. Hermione raised her wand. "Who are you?" "The voice of memory," it whispered. "The dream before the waking. The air remembers the house that betrayed him, and the blood that must be purified." Draco shouted a counter curse, the air shaking with light. The shadow recoiled, screaming without sound, and burst apart into motes of green flame. The ruins fell silent. They stood panting in the dim afterglow. Hermione turned to him. "Whatever this is, it's no longer just an ideology. It's magic. Old, sentient, dangerous." Draco's hand trembled as he lowered his wand. "I felt it," he murmured, "like it knew me, like it had been waiting." "You said once that your family kept old relics? Journals, heirlooms? Is it possible something survived the war? Something connected to Slytherin's bloodline?" He hesitated, then nodded. "There was a locket. Not that locket, another. My father kept it hidden in the vaults beneath the manor. He said it was the key to our legacy. I never dared open it." Hermione's heart quickened. "Then that's where we go next." By the time they reached Wiltshire again, the storm had grown into a tempest. Thunder rolled over the fields as they descended into the hidden vaults beneath Malfoy Manor, a labyrinth of stone corridors lit by ghostly blue torches. Draco led her through turns known only to him, until they reached a door sealed with silver runes. He pressed his palm to it, whispering a word in Latin, and the runes flared open. Inside, among relics of generations past, lay a single object upon a pedestal, a small obsidian locket, shaped like a serpent's head. Its eyes gleamed faintly as though alive. Hermione stepped closer. "So it's true." Draco swallowed hard. "My father said it was older than Hogwarts itself. He called it the voice of the air. I never believed him." The locket pulsed once. Soft green light spilling across the floor. Then it spoke. "Draco Malfoy, blood of the line. The serpent sleeps no more." The air turned cold. Hermione drew her wand, shouting, "Protego!" as green energy erupted from the locket, striking the walls like lightning. Draco staggered backward, clutching his chest. The locket's light wrapped around him, whispering words only he could hear. Hermione cried out, "Draco!" But he was already falling into the darkness, into the voice that had waited centuries to awaken. And from the depths of the vault, something ancient stirred, something that had been patient too long. Hermione's scream echoed through the vault as green light swallowed Draco whole. The magic from the serpent locket whipped around him in tendrils of living flame, striking the walls and splintering stone. She shielded her eyes against the brilliance of it, heart hammering as ancient runes blazed to life across the chamber floor, shifting, coiling, aligning themselves into a vast circle of serpents and crowns. Draco's voice rose in a strangled cry. "It's inside my head. Hold on!" Hermione shouted, running forward, her wand raised high. "Finite incantatum." The curse struck the locket, but instead of breaking, the serpent's eyes flared brighter, answering her spell with a hiss of raw power. A shockwave threw her backward against the stone wall. Her breath burst from her lungs, and dust rained down from the ceiling. When she looked up, Draco was kneeling in the center of the circle, his body trembling, his eyes alight with emerald fire. The locket hung suspended before him, whispering in a tongue older than any known language. a voice that was neither male nor female, but filled the air with authority. The air shall rise. The serpent's blood shall open the gates of remembrance. From the ashes of the fallen house, purity shall return. Hermione forced herself to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ribs. She raised her wand again and shouted the first spell that came to her mind. Confringo. The explosion shattered the pedestal. Stone shards flew in every direction, and the locket fell to the ground with a metallic cry. The magic around Draco shattering like glass. He slumped forward, gasping for air, his eyes dimming back to gray. Hermione rushed to him. "Draco, can you hear me?" He groaned, pressing a hand to his head. It spoke to me. Voices, hundreds of them. They knew my name. They knew. "It's not alive," Hermione said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "It's a conduit. Something's using it to—" She stopped. The serpent emblem on the locket was gone. In its place, etched deep into the metal, was a single word: ascend. The vault trembled. The torches flickered and went out. For one dreadful heartbeat, the world was dark. Then a whisper, faint and cold, slipped through the silence. "The chair is awake." By dawn, the storm had passed. The manor stood silent once more, though its halls carried a chill that had not been there before. Hermione and Draco sat by the hearth in the drawing room, the locket sealed inside a containment charm that pulsed softly on the table between them. He was pale but steady. "I felt something through it," he said quietly. "Not just a curse. Memories, ancient, broken, like whispers in another tongue. It called itself the House Remembered." Hermione frowned. "That phrase, I've seen it before. In the restricted archives at Hogwarts. It was a phrase tied to the founders themselves." She reached into her satchel and pulled out an old ministry document, one she'd carried since her early investigations into lost artifacts. Flipping through the pages, she found what she was looking for. A brief passage about Slytherin's heirloom, said to bind the blood of his descendants to his will. It was meant as a test, she read aloud. A legacy of obedience. But it was destroyed during the Middle Ages. At least that's what the records said. Draco's expression darkened. Clearly the records were wrong. He leaned back, eyes distant. When the locket spoke, it said something about gates of remembrance. "Do you think it's literal?" Hermione nodded slowly. "If this locket is part of an ancient binding spell, there might be more than one. Artifacts that, when united, open a passage or awaken something sealed." Her voice grew quiet. "And if that's true, someone's trying to find the rest." Over the next few days, they traced every record of pure blood vaults tied to old families. Most had been cleared after the war, their relics destroyed or locked away. But one stood out, the Selwyn estate. Once a stronghold for dark sympathizers, now abandoned and rumored to be cursed beyond repair. It was there they would find the second artifact. The journey took them across the English countryside, past misty moors and silent forests that whispered with old magic. When they reached the estate, it rose before them like a wound upon the land. A mansion of crumbling stone and blackened towers, its gates twisted with thorns. "Cheerful place," Draco muttered, though there was little humor in his tone. Hermione smirked faintly. "You used to live for this kind of grandeur." "That was before I realized most grandeur hides rot." They stepped through the gate. The air grew colder, thick with enchantments. Inside, the halls were filled with dust and cobwebs, portraits hanging askew, A faint sound drifted from deeper within, something between a whisper and a sigh. They followed it through winding corridors until they came upon a grand staircase that descended into the depths of the manor. Candles flickered to life along the walls, one by one, as though welcoming them. "Definitely cursed," Hermione murmured. Draco smirked faintly. "You think?" At the base of the stairs lay a long corridor, and at its end a door sealed in iron. Carved across it were runes matching those from the Malfoy vault. In its center was a hollow shaped like the locket. Hermione's stomach sank. "It's a key." Draco nodded grimly and withdrew the locket from his coat. As he approached, the metal began to hum, its serpent eyes glowing faintly once more. "Be careful," Hermione said softly. He pressed the locket into the hollow. The door shuddered. Then, with a thunderous crack, it opened. Beyond lay a chamber draped in shadow. At its center stood a black altar, and resting upon it, another artifact, this one a silver ring, etched with the same serpent sigil. Hermione stepped closer, her wand light catching on the ring's surface. "The second piece." Draco reached out carefully. "If this is another binding relic." The moment his fingers brushed it, green light erupted again. But this time it wasn't confined. It filled the room, swirling like a living storm. Hermione shouted his name, but her voice was lost to the roar of magic. The walls melted into shadow. The air grew thick with whispering voices. Blood calls to blood. The air remembers. Ascend. The ring fused with the locket in a flash of blinding light. Draco fell to his knees, gasping as spectral images burst through the chamber. Visions of Hogwarts in its earliest days, of 4 figures standing beneath the stars. Hermione saw them. The Founders. Gryffindor's proud stance. Ravenclaw's calm eyes. Hufflepuff's gentle strength. And Slytherin, his gaze cold as moonlight. Then his eyes turned, not toward the others, but toward her. "You meddle with the blood that is not yours," the voice hissed. "When the gates open, the lion's heart will burn." Hermione stumbled backward, the weight of that voice pressing on her chest. She could barely breathe. The light vanished. The ring fell to the ground, dull and lifeless once more. Draco was trembling, sweat beading his forehead. "Did you see it?" he rasped. "He spoke. Slytherin himself. He knows." Hermione knelt beside him. "Whatever this is, it's not a ghost. It's a spell older than Hogwarts. Someone's using his image to manipulate you." But in her heart she wasn't certain. Above them, thunder cracked, though no storm stirred outside. And somewhere far below the earth, in chambers long forgotten, a door began to open. The night deepened over Britain, heavy with mist and the uneasy quiet that follows dark magic. The wind hissed through the trees outside the Selwyn ruins, but within its ancient bones, Hermione and Draco stood breathless amid the aftermath of sorcery, older than Hogwarts itself. The silver ring lay cold between them, its serpent sigil dim and still, yet the very air thrummed as if the world itself had drawn a careful breath and held it. Draco pressed a trembling hand to his chest. "He spoke to me again," he murmured, voice ragged. The same voice from the locket. "He called me his son." Hermione's eyes searched his pale face, and though she wished to speak, no comfort came. There was no ordinary enchantment at work, no curse she could simply undo. "Then he's binding to you," she said softly. "Not to your body, but to your blood. The locket chose you. It's recognizing the Malfoy line as its vessel." He gave a mirthless laugh. "So the world falls apart, and somehow I still end up the villain." "You're not that boy anymore," she said firmly, but his gaze had already drifted toward the ring. No, he whispered, perhaps I'm something worse. They returned to the ministry in secret, slipping through the flu network under cover of night. Kingsley met them in his private office, tall, grave, and visibly wearied by days without sleep. Hermione placed both artifacts before him on the desk, their dull gleam casting faint reflections in the lamplight. These are no ordinary relics, she said. They're pieces of something ancient. The founders themselves might have forged them, or something in their time. Kingsley listened in silence. And this voice you heard, he said finally, his deep tone cautious. You believe it to be Slytherin himself? Draco shifted uneasily. I don't believe it, he said. But I heard him. He knows things no curse should know. My father's words, my family's sins. It's as if the past itself is awake. Kingsley's dark eyes moved between them. Then it seems the war's ghosts have decided they aren't done with us. He leaned forward. You must keep this quiet. If word spreads that an heir of Slytherin walks free again, the world will unravel before we can contain it. Hermione nodded. There's more. The relics seem to act as keys, opening something called the Gates of Remembrance. 2 keys have been found. There must be more. Kingsley's jaw tightened. Then we find the rest before they do. Draco frowned. They? Hermione glanced at him. The serpent's shadow. Whoever leads them, they're after the same thing. And they already have spies inside the ministry. Kingsley's voice was low, dangerous. Then trust no one, not even among the Aurors. The days that followed blurred into a relentless hunt. Every vault, every archive, every record of ancient, pure-blood families was examined. Hermione buried herself in research by candlelight while Draco chased whispers from Nocturne Alley to the ruins of old manors long deserted. It was he who returned one evening, rain-soaked and breathless, carrying a scrap of parchment burned at the edges. Found this in an old dealer's chest, he said. He traded in dark artifacts before the war. It lists 4 symbols: locket, ring, staff, and crown. Together they form the Circle of Ascension. Hermione's eyes widened. 4 founders, 4 relics. But Slytherins are being awakened first. Draco nodded grimly. And the next one, the staff, was last seen in the possession of the Caro family before the war. If it's still anywhere, it'll be at their ancestral seat in Northumberland. Then that's where we go, Hermione said. They left under the cloak of darkness once more, traveling north across a landscape drowned in fog. The Caro estate loomed above a ravine, its towers bent like fingers clutching the sky. The gates were rusted, the grounds overgrown, and the silence was complete, save for the distant caw of a raven. Hermione's wand cast a soft golden glow as they entered the grand hall. The floor was strewn with broken portraits and shattered glass. A long table lay overturned, its surface carved with runes that pulsed faintly at their presence. Draco knelt beside them. Protective enchantments, old ones, but something's broken through them. They followed a faint trail of footprints, half covered in dust, leading toward the cellar stairs. At the bottom was a heavy oak door, its surface marked with claw-like scratches. Hermione traced the runes with her wand and murmured a counterspell. The door swung inward. Inside was a single figure kneeling beside an altar, a woman cloaked in black, her wand hovering above a silver staff, engraved with serpents. The moment she turned, Hermione froze. Pansy, Draco breathed. Pansy Parkinson's face was pale, her eyes gleaming with a strange fervor. "Draco," she whispered, her voice trembling with delight and madness. "You came at last. The heir returns, just as the prophecy said." "Pansy, listen to me," Draco said carefully, taking a step forward. "You don't know what you're doing. That staff, it's cursed." She smiled thinly. "Cursed? No, Draco, chosen. The serpent's shadow has waited for you. The blood of Malfoy and the magic of the Founders united again." Hermione raised her wand. "Step away from the staff, Pansy." Pansy's eyes flicked toward her. "The mudblood thinks she commands the blood of Slytherin? You should kneel." Her wand flashed. A bolt of green fire shot across the room. Hermione deflected it just in time, sending shards of stone flying from the wall. Draco lunged forward, shouting, "Expelliarmus!" Pansy's wand spun from her hand, clattering across the floor. But even unarmed, she laughed. "It's too late. The staff knows him. It calls to him. You can't stop it." The staff began to hum, its runes glowing in eerie emerald. Draco stared at it, unable to move. "It's the same voice," he whispered. Hermione grabbed his arm. "Don't listen." But the light grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He reached out, almost against his will, and his fingers brushed the metal. A blinding flash filled the cellar. The walls vanished into green mist. Hermione found herself standing in a great stone hall. Hogwarts, yet not as she knew it. The torches burned blue, and the banners bore not 4 houses, but one, a serpent twined around a crown. Before her stood Slytherin himself, robed in black, eyes of silver flame. "You walk beside my blood," he said, his voice like the hiss of the sea, "and still you defy me." Hermione raised her wand, her voice shaking. "You're a memory, nothing more." "Memories build worlds," he said, "and through the air, I will rebuild mine." He turned to Draco, who stood frozen beside her, eyes wide and empty. "Take the crown, my son. Complete the circle. Purify the blood." "No!" Hermione shouted, hurling a spell. "Finite!" The illusion shattered like glass. The cellar returned with a scream of wind. Draco fell backward, gasping, the staff clattering beside him. Its glow dimmed to nothing. Hermione rushed to his side, clutching his hand. "It's all right. You're here. You're not his." Draco's breathing steadied, though his eyes were distant. "He showed me everything," he whispered. "His world, his vision. He thinks I can bring it back." "Then we destroy the last relic before he does," she said fiercely. "The crown." Draco looked at her, something unspoken in his gaze. Fear, hope, and the smallest spark of trust. "Then we do it together," he said. Outside, dawn broke pale across the sky, though the light brought no warmth. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, unseen and waiting, the final piece of the circle stirred, and the serpent's crown whispered to be found. The dawn that followed was thin and colorless, a ghost of light that could not chase away the shadows gathering over the wizarding world. The Caro estate lay in ruins behind them, its stones cracked and blackened by ancient magic. Hermione and Draco stood on the hill overlooking the valley, the cold wind tugging at their cloaks. Below them, mist coiled through the trees like drifting smoke. "The last relic," Hermione murmured. "The crown." Draco nodded grimly. "The staff, ring, and locket are tied to Slytherin's blood, but the crown, where could it be?" She looked toward the horizon. There was once a record in Hogwarts of an artifact known as the Diadem of Truth. It belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw before it was cursed by Voldemort and destroyed. But this crown, it's something else. older, darker. The texts said that Slytherin forged his crown from the remains of a serpent slain by his own hand. The metal was said to remember every whisper of its master's will. Draco's jaw tightened, and if someone awakens that memory, we're finished. He turned away from the sunrise, his cloak whipping around him. Where does your research say it was kept? Hermione hesitated. Not where. Who? Draco's eyes narrowed. Who? Helena Ravenclaw, she said softly. The Grey Lady. By nightfall, they stood once more beneath the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall. Hogwarts was quiet, sleeping beneath the hum of magic that had endured through centuries of triumph and tragedy. The castle walls seemed to breathe, their stone alive with memories. Hermione had written ahead to Professor McGonagall, and the headmistress met them at the grand doors. Her face was older now, lined with wisdom and sorrow, yet her eyes still burned with fierce intelligence. Granger, Malfoy, her tone carried both caution and curiosity. You come unannounced and at such an hour. I hope this visit is worth waking half the castle's portraits. Hermione bowed her head slightly. We need the Grey Lady's help. It concerns an ancient relic, one that may threaten the wizarding world again. McGonagall's gaze shifted to Draco. You bring strange company for a mission of trust. Draco met her eyes without flinching. I'm not here for redemption, Professor. I'm here to stop what my ancestor started. Something softened in her expression then. Not forgiveness, but understanding. Very well, she said at last, but tread carefully. The ghosts remember more than most living souls wish to know. They found Helena Ravenclaw in the shadowed corridor beside the library, her pale form glimmering faintly in the torchlight. She turned at their approach, eyes like frosted glass, her voice soft as wind through a graveyard. Hermione Granger, she said, the scholar who sees knowledge as salvation, and Draco Malfoy, heir of a house that once betrayed all it touched. Draco bowed his head slightly. You know why we're here. I do. The Grey Lady's form flickered. You seek the crown of the serpent, a relic forged not for glory, but for dominion. Hermione stepped closer. You've seen it? Helena's eyes drifted to the ceiling, her expression distant. Long ago, before the founding of Hogwarts, my mother spoke of Salazar Slytherin's ambition, a crown that would command loyalty through fear, bending will to blood. When the founders divided, he hid it away, fearful even of his own power. Only one who carries his line could awaken it. Draco's hand curled into a fist, and it's calling to me now. The ghost regarded him sadly. Then you must resist it. The crown lies buried deep beneath the school, in the Chamber of Secrets, where the serpent's bones still sleep. Hermione's breath caught, but the chamber collapsed after the war. The basilisk was destroyed. Helena's gaze hardened. Destroyed? No, child. Magic such as that does not fade. It waits. The corridor grew cold. Hours later, they descended into the depths of Hogwarts, past twisting staircases, and through the secret passages known only to the bravest or the most reckless of students. The entrance to the chamber had been sealed after the war, but Hermione's charms, combined with Draco's inherited blood right, broke the wards. The door opened with a groan, releasing air that smelled of stone, age, and something faintly reptilian. They entered the tunnel, their wand light flickering across wet walls and serpentine carvings. When they reached the vast, echoing hall of the chamber, Hermione felt a shiver run through her. The statue of Salazar Slytherin loomed above them, its stone eyes cold and watchful. Beneath it lay the bones of the basilisk, bleached and monstrous. Draco's voice was barely a whisper. "It feels alive!" Hermione nodded. "Magic this old never dies." They approached the base of the statue. The floor there was carved with runes that pulsed faintly under Draco's steps. When he reached the center, the serpentine carvings began to glow. A hiss filled the air, soft, almost gentle. Then a voice deep and ancient echoed through the chamber. "At last the blood returns." The eyes of the statue flared with green fire. A section of stone at its base shifted, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, resting upon a stand of dark glass, was a crown wrought in black metal, shaped like coiled serpents, whose eyes burned emerald. Hermione's breath caught. "We've found it." Draco stepped forward, drawn by a pull stronger than reason. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Don't touch it," Hermione warned, but he was already reaching out. His fingers brushed the metal, and the chamber erupted in light. The floor cracked. The basilisk's bones shuddered and began to move, twisting and reforming into a spectral shape. The ghost of the serpent reborn. Its massive head rose above them, eyes burning with venomous flame. Hermione raised her wand. "Protego Maxima!" The serpent struck, smashing against her shield with a deafening roar. Draco fell to his knees, the crown now fused to his palm, glowing like molten gold. His voice was not his own. When he spoke, "The air ascends." Hermione turned on him, shouting over the chaos. "Draco, fight it, you're stronger than this." For a moment she saw him, the boy beneath the curse, his eyes flickering gray through the emerald haze. "Hermione," he whispered, "run." She shook her head, refusing. "I won't leave you." The serpent lunged again. This time Hermione didn't defend. She attacked. "Reducto!" The spell tore through the chamber wall, sending shards of stone cascading. Dust filled the air. Draco staggered to his feet, clutching his hand. The crown pulsed once, then cracked. Green light spilled from the fracture, and the spectral serpent let out a shriek of rage before collapsing into mist. The crown shattered, its pieces scattering across the floor. For a long moment there was only silence. Hermione lowered her wand, chest heaving. Draco stood before her, his face pale and drenched in sweat. The mark of the serpent was burned into his palm, faint but alive. "It's over," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "No. 3 relics destroyed. But 1 remains." She met his gaze, fear rising anew. "The 4th, the heart of the circle," he nodded. "The source of it all. And I think I know where it lies." Hermione's voice trembled. "Where?" Draco turned toward the statue, its shattered eyes still glowing faintly in the dark. "In me," he said. "It's been in me all along." And in that terrible quiet, as the dust settled around them, the ancient voice of Slytherin whispered once more, soft, triumphant, and terribly alive. "The serpent does not die. It sheds its skin." The silence that followed was deeper than darkness. The chamber of secrets, long thought dead and forgotten, breathed again. A living tomb of magic and memory. Dust floated like spectral snow through the torchlight, and in its glow Hermione saw the truth of what Draco had said. The serpent's mark, burned into his palm, pulsed faintly. A heartbeat not his own. He stood unmoving, staring at it, his face white as the marble around them. "I can feel it," he whispered, "like a second pulse beneath my skin. It's not pain, it's recognition." Hermione's wand light trembled in her hand. Then Slytherin bound his final relic to blood, not metal, the crown, the ring, the staff, the locket. They were only pieces of the spell. The heart of it has always been the bloodline. Draco gave a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. So I'm the final key, the serpent reborn, whether I will it or not. She stepped toward him, her voice low but fierce. Then we break the circle. We find a way to undo it before the shadow uses you to finish what Slytherin began. He lifted his eyes to hers, and for a moment the storm inside him faltered. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, she admitted. But it's what we do. We fight what others run from. The echo of her words lingered long after they left the chamber behind. They returned to the surface in silence, emerging into the faint light of dawn. The castle was still asleep, unaware that far beneath its stones, the blood of an ancient wizard stirred again. In the great hall, McGonagall awaited them, her expression grave as they recounted what had occurred. When Draco revealed the mark on his hand, the old witch drew back as though struck. Merlin's beard, she breathed. This is beyond anything we faced before. If the relics have awakened through him... They have, Hermione interrupted, and the serpent's shadow will know it soon, if they don't already. McGonagall's gaze turned sharp. Then you must leave Hogwarts at once. If they come here, they'll destroy this place to reach him. Draco's voice was quiet, steady. They'll come whether we stay or not. I won't hide while others pay for my blood. McGonagall hesitated, studying him. Then she nodded once, as if conceding to something inevitable. Then go, and quickly. There's an old safe house in the Scottish Highlands. It was once Dumbledore's retreat. Few know of it now. You'll find shelter there while you plan your next move. Hermione inclined her head in gratitude. Thank you, Professor. As they turned to leave, the headmistress spoke again, her tone softer. Miss Granger, remember that redemption, even when earned, rarely comes without sacrifice. Hermione's eyes flicked briefly to Draco, but she said nothing. They traveled north through rain and fog, following narrow roads that wound through the highlands like silver threads. The land was ancient here, slight, untamed and wild, its silence broken only by the distant cry of ravens. When at last they reached the safe house, it stood alone upon a windswept cliff, a small stone cottage half buried in mist. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and herbs. Books lined the shelves, their spines faded, their titles half erased by time. Hermione lit the hearth with a flick of her wand, and golden light filled the room. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to rest. Draco sat by the window, staring into the storm. I used to think bloodlines were everything, he said softly, that they made us who we are. Now I see they're just chains we're too afraid to break. Hermione watched the firelight play across his face. You've already broken yours, she said. Every choice you've made since the war proves that. He looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing her not as the girl from the past, but the woman who had walked through fire and never bowed. And yet, he murmured, I still feel like the world sees me as my father's son. Hermione's voice was gentle. Then let the world be wrong. For a while they said nothing more. The storm raged outside and the fire crackled softly within. At midnight, Draco woke with a start. His hand burned, the serpent mark alive beneath his skin, glowing faintly green in the dark. He could hear whispers again threading through the walls like a serpent's hiss. Come to me, heir of the house. The circle is not yet whole. He He rose, his breath shallow, and stepped outside. The wind howled across the cliffs, carrying a sound that was not wind at all. A low chant, distant but unmistakable. The shadow had found them. Hermione burst from the doorway moments later, wand in hand. "Draco!" Shapes moved through the fog, cloaked figures, their masks gleaming faintly in the stormlight. There were a dozen of them, maybe more. At their head stood a tall man in dark robes, his face hidden by a silver mask shaped like a serpent's head. Draco's pulse quickened. He knew that voice when it came. "Draco Malfoy," the man said, "son of a broken house. The circle calls for its final heir." Hermione's wand snapped up. "You're too late. The relics are gone." The man laughed softly. "Destroyed? No, Miss Granger, you cannot destroy what was born of blood. You can only return it." His mask turned toward Draco. "The blood remembers. The serpent remembers." The mark on Draco's palm flared in answer. He gritted his teeth, fighting the pull. "Get back, Hermione. It wants me, not you." "Then it can't have you," she said fiercely. The shadow advanced. Spells filled the air, streaks of light clashing against the darkness. Hermione's shield shimmered around them, her magic bright and wild. Draco fought beside her, his movements sharp and precise, his wand flashing through smoke and rain. But there were too many. A curse struck the ground near Hermione, throwing her backward. Draco turned just in time to catch her before she fell. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing fatal," she gasped, struggling to rise. "But we can't hold them off forever." The leader raised his wand. "You cannot escape what you were born to be, Draco. You carry the final key within your blood. Come willingly, and she may yet live." Draco's eyes met Hermione's. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. The rain, the fire, the unspoken truth neither dared to name. Then he turned to the shadow. "You want the air?" His voice was cold, steady. "Then come take him." He thrust out his marked hand. Green fire exploded from his palm, striking the earth like a thunderclap. The ground split open, releasing a surge of ancient energy that hurled the shadow's followers backward. The serpent's voice roared through the storm. "The circle breaks." Hermione seized his arm, shouting over the gale, "Draco, stop! You'll kill yourself." He looked at her and for the briefest moment smiled. "If it ends this, it's worth it." The light engulfed them both. The shadow screamed, a sound not of men but of something older and dying. When the storm faded, the cliffs were silent once more. Hermione opened her eyes to find Draco lying motionless beside her. The mark on his palm was gone, burned away, leaving only a faint scar. She knelt beside him, pressing a trembling hand to his chest. His heartbeat was weak, but there. "You're safe," she whispered, her tears mingling with the rain. "It's over." But far away in the ruins of the Chamber of Secrets, green light flickered once more, faint but alive, and from the shadows, a voice as old as the earth itself whispered almost tenderly, "The serpent sheds its skin, but the soul remembers." When Hermione awoke, dawn was creeping across the cliffs. A pale and weary light that turned the mist to silver. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Draco lay beside her upon the cold, rain-soaked ground, his face ashen, his hair plastered to his forehead, the faint scar on his palm, the mark where the serpent had once lived, gleamed white in the morning light. He was breathing, but only just. Hermione knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she whispered spell after spell. Healing charms, strengthening incantations, every word of magic she knew. A faint glow pulsed beneath her palms, warm and golden, but it was not enough. The damage went deeper than wounds of flesh. Whatever power he had unleashed the night before had burned through him like wildfire. "Don't you dare," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me now." His eyelids fluttered, and for an instant gray met brown. "Still, bossy," he rasped. Hermione gave a choked laugh, half sob, half relief. "Still alive? Barely." He winced, trying to sit up, but she pressed a hand against his shoulder. "Rest. You've done enough." He looked past her then, out toward the misty horizon. The cliffs stretched endlessly, and far below the sea rolled and crashed against the rocks. "Did it work?" he asked quietly. "Are they gone?" Hermione followed his gaze. The ground bore no trace of the battle. No footprints, no bodies, nothing but the scar of blackened earth where the serpent's fire had struck. "For now," she said, "but the voice, the magic that made the circle, it isn't finished. I can still feel it, faint as an echo." Draco closed his eyes. "It won't stop until it has me. Or what's left of me." Hermione shook her head fiercely. "No. We end it before it ends you." They buried what was left of the battlefield, burned soil and broken stones beneath layers of earth, sealing the place with wards so old even time itself would forget the path to it. Then, when Draco could stand again, they returned to the safe house. The days that followed were quiet, almost peaceful. Hermione spent her hours among the dusty books Dumbledore had once collected. Volumes of ancient bloodline lore, the magic of inheritance, and the laws of binding that predated even the founders. Draco, though pale and haunted, helped her search, his sharp mind returning to old habits of logic and precision. Once, she found him staring into the fire, lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. "That maybe my father wasn't wrong about everything," he said. "He always spoke of blood as destiny. I used to think he meant power, but maybe he meant burden." Hermione sat beside him, the warmth of the fire touching her face. "Your blood doesn't define you. Your choices do." He smiled faintly. "You'd make a terrible Slytherin Granger," she smirked. "And you'd make a surprisingly good Gryffindor." For a heartbeat, the air between them softened, quiet, fragile, almost tender, but then Draco's mark flickered once more, faintly, like the dying pulse of an ember refusing to fade. Hermione's heart clenched. "It's still inside you, isn't it?" He nodded. "The serpent sleeps, but it dreams." It was 3 nights later that the dreams began. Hermione woke to find Draco standing at the window, his face pale in the moonlight. His voice was hollow when he spoke. "I saw him again. Slytherin. He was different this time. Not wrathful, almost pleading." Hermione rubbed her eyes, still half asleep. "Pleading for what?" "For release," he whispered. "He said the circle wasn't meant to conquer. It was meant to preserve. He created it to guard something. Something hidden beneath Hogwarts itself." Hermione froze. "Guard what?" "I don't know," Draco said, "but he called it the heart of the serpent. He said it was his legacy. The source of his power, buried, to keep it from those who would misuse it." Her mind raced. Then the serpent's shadow might not have been trying to awaken him at all. They were trying to find this heart. He turned to her, his eyes alight with grim understanding. "And now that the circle is broken, it's unguarded." They shared a look, one of dread and determination. Within the hour, they were gone. Hogwarts slept as they arrived, the castle cloaked in silver moonlight. Moving through its corridors was like walking through a dream. The paintings whispered in their frames, and the torches burned lower in reverence to the past. Hermione led the way down to the chamber once more, her wand casting a golden glow across the damp stones. The air was different now, warmer, waiting. When they reached the basilisk's remains, the bones were gone. Only dust remained, and beneath it the faint outline of runes that had not been there before, a circle carved deep into the stone. Draco knelt, brushing his fingers across the markings. This is it, the circle's core. Hermione crouched beside him, her brow furrowed. The writing's ancient, part Latin, part Parseltongue. It says, "The blood shall seal, the heart shall sleep." He looked at her. If the blood sealed it, then only blood can wake it. Before she could stop him, he drew a small blade from his pocket, silver, thin as a whisper, and cut his palm. Blood fell onto the runes, glowing red for an instant before seeping into the stone. Draco, no. The ground trembled. Light burst through the cracks, flooding the chamber in gold and green. The statue of Slytherin shuddered, its stone lips parting as if to speak. The voice that followed was softer than before, almost sorrowful. "You have broken the chains, my heir. The heart remembers." The floor split open. Beneath them yawned a pit of light, swirling, endless, ancient. Within it beat something vast and alive, like the pulse of the earth itself. Hermione staggered backward, shielding her eyes. "What is it?" "The heart," Draco whispered, staring into the light. "It's beautiful." "Don't," she said sharply. "Whatever it is, it's not meant to be touched." But even as she spoke, the light reached toward him. Tendrils of energy winding up his arm, filling his veins with fire. He gasped, his body trembling, his eyes glowing with that terrible, familiar green. "Blood to blood," the voice intoned. "The heir returns what was taken." Hermione ran forward, grabbing his shoulders. "Draco, fight it! It's not him, it's magic, old magic!" For a moment it seemed she was too late. The light consumed him, swallowing his figure whole. Then slowly his hand rose, not in surrender, but in defiance. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "I am not you." The light faltered. The chamber roared with the sound of collapsing stone. Hermione threw up a shield as the walls cracked and dust filled the air. When the light finally dimmed, she saw Draco kneeling in the center of the ruins, the pit sealed once more. The mark was gone from his skin. She ran to him. "Draco!" He opened his eyes. They were gray again. Human, weary, alive. "It's over," he said softly. "He's gone." Hermione looked around them. The broken chamber, the fading glow, the quiet peace that followed. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "We did it." Above them, Hogwarts shuddered once, as though breathing out after holding its breath for centuries. And somewhere in the stillness, a whisper of ancient magic drifted through the stone. Not menacing, not dark, but almost like gratitude. "The serpent sleeps at last." Hermione took his hand, their fingers entwining without words. Together they walked back toward the light, leaving the darkness behind. The corridors of Hogwarts were quiet when Hermione and Draco returned from the depths. The castle felt different now. Not lighter, not freer, but settled, as though some ancient burden had finally been laid to rest. Yet the air held a strange stillness, a waiting. The walls themselves seemed to listen to their footsteps. Hermione's robes were torn, streaked with dust, and her wand hand trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with fierce, exhausted determination. Draco walked beside her, slower now, his movements careful. The scar where the serpent's mark had been was faint but visible, like a shadow that would never quite fade. "Do you think it's truly over?" he asked quietly. Hermione hesitated. "I think it's sleeping, and if we're lucky, it'll sleep forever." But in her heart, she wasn't sure. Magic that old rarely vanished completely. It merely changed shape. When they reached the entrance hall, they found Professor McGonagall waiting. She looked at them both for a long time before speaking. "You've gone where no one should tread," she said, "and yet the castle stands whole. Whatever you did below, it seems to have healed more than just stone." Hermione managed a tired smile. "Then maybe it was worth it." McGonagall's sharp gaze softened. "You've both done what many would have feared to face. The Ministry will want a full report, of course, but..." She paused as though considering her words carefully. "Perhaps not all truths are meant for their records." Draco inclined his head. "I'd prefer it that way." McGonagall gave a curt nod. Then let the matter rest. At least for now. Go home, both of you. The world will still be mending when you wake." They returned to London the next evening, traveling through the Floo network in silence. The Ministry building glimmered in the distance, tall and sterile beneath the street lamps. But Hermione turned away from it. Instead, she led Draco through the winding alleys of Diagon Alley, now quieter than it had been in years. Shops once shuttered by war had reopened. Children laughed in the distance, chasing enchanted toy broomsticks. The world, at last, was learning how to live again. They stopped before a small, weathered inn tucked between Flourish and Blots, and an old potion shop. Hermione's eyes softened. "The Silver Chalice," she said. "My old haunt when I first joined the department. The owner still keeps a fire going even in summer." Inside, the air was warm and welcoming, filled with the scent of cinnamon and oak. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing light across the walls. Draco sank into a chair by the window, while Hermione ordered tea from the innkeeper, who blinked once at the sight of Draco Malfoy, but said nothing. When she returned, she set 2 steaming cups on the table. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, only full, as if the words they might say had already been spoken in another language, one made of shared battles and unspoken understanding. Finally, Draco broke the quiet. "I keep thinking about the things he said," he murmured. "Slytherin? He wasn't just speaking of bloodlines. He talked about memory, about the way magic carries pieces of those who wield it. Maybe that's what all of this was really about, the past refusing to be forgotten." Hermione's eyes met his. "The past isn't meant to be forgotten, only understood and changed." He smiled faintly. "You always were better at finding the right words. And you," she said with a soft laugh, "were always better at making them sound like confessions." For a fleeting moment, they shared something quiet and fragile, a warmth born not of victory, but of survival. The storm had passed, but the memory of it lingered in both of them. Days turned into weeks. The Ministry conducted its investigations, none of which reached the truth. Rumors circulated, whispers of strange lights beneath the castle, of powerful spells that had stirred and died in the same night. But no one mentioned Draco Malfoy's name, nor Hermione Granger's. Kingsley himself saw to that. Still, the world seemed to change around them. The serpent sigils that had appeared in dark corners faded from sight. The cursed artifacts that once pulsed with green light went dull and lifeless. And though some still spoke of the serpent's shadow, it was as if the movement had never truly existed. Hermione continued her work at the department, though her thoughts often wandered to that night in the chamber, to the look on Draco's face when the light had engulfed them both. He had not been the same since, though she doubted anyone else noticed. Sometimes she caught him standing at the ministry's windows, watching the clouds drift above the city. Other times, he disappeared for days only to return with no explanation. When she asked, he would simply say, "Old ghosts?" and smile that weary, haunted smile of his. But the world was healing, and so in time were they. It was nearly winter when the letter arrived. Hermione found it waiting on her desk, sealed with deep green wax. There was no name, no mark, only a single line scrawled across the parchment inside. "The serpent sleeps, but not forever." Her heart froze. That evening she went to see Draco. He was living now in a small flat above a bookshop in Nocturne Alley. A strange place for him, but perhaps fitting. The shadows there were quieter, more honest. When he opened the door, she saw the look in his eyes and knew he had received the same message. "Whoever sent it," he said before she could speak, "they want us afraid. They want us watching the dark again." Hermione stepped inside, her cloak dripping with rain. "Do you think it's real?" He hesitated. "I don't know. But I keep dreaming of the chamber, of the light beneath the stone. It felt unfinished." She crossed the room to stand beside him. "Then we'll face it if it comes, together." The word hung between them, simple, undeniable, together. He looked at her then, really looked, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You always were the brave one," he murmured. "And you," she said softly, "were always stronger than you knew." Outside, the rain eased and the city lights shimmered on the wet cobblestones below. Somewhere far beyond the noise and the fog, Hogwarts stood watch beneath the stars, silent and enduring. For now, the serpent slept, and though neither of them could say what lay ahead, whether peace or shadow, love or loss, they both knew this. The world had been broken and remade before, and it would be again. But this time when the darkness rose, it would not find them apart. Because even while the world was falling, they had chosen each other, and that choice, unshaken, imperfect, human, was stronger than any magic the time could remember. Winter fell upon Britain like a quiet spell, the kind that crept softly and lingered long after the world stopped noticing its chill. The wizarding world had grown peaceful again, or so it appeared. Snow blanketed the roofs of Diagon Alley, muffling the sounds of shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps and children laughing in scarves twice their size. The war, the whispers, the serpent's shadow, all seemed distant, like a bad dream fading in the morning light. Yet Hermione Granger had never been one to believe in perfect peace. She sat at her desk in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, her quill resting idle beside untouched parchment. The fire burned low in the grate. It was late, long past when the ministry emptied, but she could not bring herself to leave. The letter, that letter, lay open before her once more, its words etched in her mind. The serpent sleeps, but not forever. She had read it 100 times since it arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant and deliberate, with the faintest trace of something old, a style that no one used anymore. Every instinct in her told her it was more than a warning. It was a promise. The door creaked behind her. She didn't need to turn. "You're late," she said. Draco's voice came low and even. "You knew I'd come." He stepped into the light, his cloak dusted with snow. His face was sharper in winter, pale, thoughtful, the faint scar on his palm still visible when the firelight caught it. "I couldn't sleep either," he said. "Because of the letter?" He nodded. "Because of the dreams?" Hermione rose, crossing the room to face him. "You're still seeing the chamber?" He hesitated. "Not the chamber. Something beneath it. A place that doesn't exist anymore. Or shouldn't. A sea of glass, a heart of green fire, and a voice that keeps saying my name." She frowned. "Slytherin? No." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Something older." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then Hermione reached for her cloak. "Show me." They traveled through the night, the snow falling thicker as they left London behind. The world seemed to shrink around them, fields and forests swallowed by white, sky and ground becoming one. When at last they reached the cliffs beyond Hogwarts, the wind had turned fierce, biting through fabric and flesh alike. "This is where it ends," Draco said quietly, his breath forming mist in the cold air. Hermione gazed down at the valley below, where the faint outline of the castle could be seen through the snow. The towers were dim, the windows shuttered against the storm. "And where it began," she murmured. They walked in silence until the earth gave way to stone, and there, half buried beneath frost and shadow, stood a doorway that should not have been there. Ancient, cracked, carved with the serpent sigil. The mark glowed faintly as Draco approached. "I've seen this in my dreams," he said, "but it was never real until now." Hermione's wand was steady in her hand. "If it's calling you, it's still bound to your blood. We don't know what's behind that door." He glanced at her, a faint, crooked smile tugging at his lips. "That's never stopped you before." She almost smiled back. "Then let's make sure it doesn't kill us." He placed his hand upon the stone. The serpent sigil flared to life. Green, then gold, then white. The door shuddered and slid open, releasing a breath of air so cold it burned. Inside was darkness. They stepped through together, and the door sealed behind them with a sound like thunder. The tunnel beyond sloped downward, carved from smooth black stone. Strange runes flickered along the walls, their glow pulsing in time with their footsteps. Hermione murmured a light charm, but the magic wavered, uncertain. "Something's dampening the spells," she whispered. "Not dampening," Draco said softly. "Feeding." As they descended, the walls began to shift. Carvings emerged from the stone, not just serpents now, but faces, hundreds of them, wizards and witches, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent cries. Hermione's stomach twisted. "These aren't carvings. They're memories," Draco finished. His voice was tight, strained. "Trapped ones. He bound them here, the memories of those who carried his mark." The air grew heavier. Every breath tasted of earth and salt. At the tunnel's end, the space widened into a vast cavern. And there it was, the heart of the serpent. It was not a relic, nor a jewel, nor a flame, but something that seemed to be all three. It pulsed in the center of the cavern, like a living star, suspended above the ground, bound by chains of light that shimmered with ancient magic. Every pulse sent a ripple through the air, like the beating of a giant heart. Hermione could barely speak. "It's alive." Draco took a step forward, his eyes wide with awe. "It's waiting." "For what?" "For me." He reached out and the light responded, a tendril curling toward his hand, not menacing but almost curious. Hermione caught his wrist. "Draco, don't. You don't know what it wants." "I know exactly what it wants," he said quietly. "It wants to be free." "Then we can't let it." He looked at her then, and she saw in his eyes not the arrogance of the boy he had once been, but the weary courage of a man who had finally accepted his fate. "If we leave it, someone else will find it, someone worse. It's bound to my line. It will always call to me, so I have to end it." Hermione shook her head. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." He smiled, faint and tired. "You taught me that sometimes the only way to break a spell is to become part of it." Before she could stop him, he pulled free. He stepped into the circle of light and the chains dissolved. The heart flared bright as the sun, flooding the cavern with gold. The air hummed, the stone beneath their feet trembling with power. "Draco!" Hermione cried, running forward, but a wall of force threw her back. He stood at the center, arms outstretched, the light wrapping around him like a crown. His voice echoed clear and calm. "I am the last of your blood. I am not your heir. I am your end." The heart shuddered once, twice, then imploded in a burst of radiance that swallowed everything. Hermione threw up a shield, but the force knocked her to the ground. Light poured through the cracks in the world, and then silence. When she opened her eyes, the cavern was gone. She lay beneath open sky, the stars above her bright and cold. The snow had stopped. Beside her, Draco was still. His face was peaceful, almost serene, his hair dusted with frost. The serpent's scar on his hand had vanished completely. Hermione pressed a shaking hand to his chest. For a moment there was nothing. And then, faintly, a heartbeat, a breath. His eyes opened slowly, gray and clear. "It's gone," he whispered, "all of it." She smiled through her tears. "Good." They sat in silence for a long time, watching as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the serpent's heart no longer beat. The circle was broken, its magic undone, and though the world above remained scarred, it lived. Hermione turned to Draco. "While the world was falling," she said softly, "you chose to save it." He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "No, Granger, I chose you." And for the first time since the war, the world felt whole again. The world after the Heart's unmaking was quieter than either of them expected. Magic itself seemed subdued, as if the great pulse that had driven its secret rhythm had gone still for the first time in 1,000 years. Even the air carried a strange stillness. The snow fell gently over the Scottish Highlands, soft as ash, and the wind whispered only in sighs. Hermione and Draco made their way back to the castle as dawn bled into the horizon. Hogwarts stood in the distance, cloaked in the pale blue light of morning, its towers gilded with frost. It felt older now and wiser, as if the ancient fortress understood that one more chapter in its long history had finally closed. They walked without speaking, their boots crunching softly through the snow. Every step brought a kind of peace, but also a heaviness neither could name. When they reached the castle gates, the runes along the arch shimmered faintly, glowing in welcome. For the first time since the war, the wards felt whole again. "Do you feel it?" Hermione asked quietly. Draco nodded. The castle's breathing. They crossed the threshold. Inside, warmth greeted them like an old friend. Candles flickered to life in the sconces. Portraits turned drowsily to watch, and somewhere in the distance the house elves stirred, their magic humming faintly through the stone. Hermione brushed snow from her cloak, her gaze wandering across the familiar hall. It was the same, and yet different. The echoes were softer now, the shadows less sharp. Hogwarts had survived so many tragedies and somehow always found its way back to hope. McGonagall will want to know what happened, she said at last. She'll know, Draco murmured. The castle tells her everything. He gave a faint smile, but it did not quite reach his eyes. They found the headmistress in her office, standing before the great window that overlooked the grounds. Morning light poured over her like molten gold. The ever-watchful phoenix fox's descendant dozed upon its perch, feathers gleaming faintly with embers. "You're alive," McGonagall said, turning toward them. It was not a question, only a statement of quiet relief. I had begun to suspect that Hogwarts had taken you for its own. "We found the heart," Hermione said. "It's gone now. The circle's broken." McGonagall's eyes flicked to Draco. "And at what cost?" He hesitated. Less than it could have been. There was something in his tone that made the older witch's expression soften. She stepped closer, studying him as though seeing him for the first time. "You've carried more than your share of ghosts, Mr. Malfoy. I hope this was the last of them." Draco inclined his head. "So do I." McGonagall regarded them both, then nodded once. "Go, rest. You've done enough." Hermione hesitated. "Professor, the heart, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a memory, a living one. What happens to the magic bound to it now? The same thing that happens to all things. Once they are freed," McGonagall said softly, "it finds new paths." She turned back to the window. The conversation was over. Days passed in a strange, peaceful blur. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the castle in white. Students returned from holiday, their laughter echoing through the halls. Lessons resumed, life began again. Yet for Hermione, the quiet was unfamiliar, almost fragile. After so many months of pursuit and peril, stillness felt like something she had to learn all over again. She often found herself walking the castle grounds alone, through the courtyards, across the frozen lake, beneath the watchful gargoyles. She thought of the heart of Slytherin's voice fading into silence, and of Draco's hand glowing with that impossible light. He had not left Hogwarts either. Sometimes she would see him at the edge of the grounds, standing beneath the great oak tree by the black lake, his cloak billowing in the wind. He never seemed to mind the cold. One afternoon she joined him there. The lake stretched out before them, its surface smooth and dark as glass. The reflection of the sky shimmered across it, pale clouds drifting like slow ghosts. "You should be in London," she said, pulling her cloak tighter. "You could rebuild your family's name. You could do anything." Draco's eyes stayed on the horizon. "You mean I could pretend that the past never happened?" "That's not what I said." He glanced at her then, a small, tired smile ghosting across his lips. "No, but it's what everyone else thinks." Hermione looked out over the water. "People change." "Do they?" he asked. "Or do they just learn how to hide the parts that scare them most?" She didn't answer right away. "Maybe both." For a while they stood in silence, the wind tugging gently at their cloaks. Then Hermione said softly, I'm glad you didn't die." Draco gave a quiet laugh, the first she'd heard in weeks. "That makes two of us." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, like warmth on a cold morning, or light glimpsed through mist. That night, Hermione dreamt of the chamber again, but this time there was no serpent, no fire, no voice whispering from the dark, only the echo of footsteps, and a single torch burning in the distance. She followed the sound through corridors that twisted endlessly until she found herself standing before the statue of Slytherin once more. But its face was different now, not proud or cruel, but still empty. The eyes that had once glowed with green fire were carved hollow. The stone lips moved, forming words she could not hear. When she woke, the dawn was breaking. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Draco, his hair damp from snow, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving," he said. Her chest tightened. "Leaving where?" "Anywhere that isn't here," he said simply. "The war's over, but the name Malfoy still weighs on this country like a curse. Maybe if I go far enough, it'll stop echoing." Hermione searched his face for any sign of hesitation. There was none. "You'll come back?" He hesitated. "Do you want me to?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes." He nodded once, as though that were enough. "Then I will." She reached for something to say, a word, a spell, anything that could hold him there. But before she could speak, he took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For believing there was still something human left in me." And then he was gone, disappearing into the falling snow. Weeks turned to months. The world moved on. Spring came to Hogwarts, soft and golden. Flowers crept across the hillsides where snow had lain thick only months before. Life returned, as it always did. And sometimes when the wind shifted just right, Hermione would think she heard a voice carried upon it. Low, steady, familiar, Draco Malfoy's voice. And though she never saw him again that year, she always felt that somewhere beneath the ever-turning stars, he was still out there, walking through a world that had been broken and remade, seeking a peace that had finally become his own. The serpent slept, and the war was over. But magic and memory and the quiet, unspoken bond between them, those things would never fade. Spring ripened into summer, and the world of witches and wizards began to hum with life again. London shimmered under sunlit skies. Children chased fluttering spells through the cobblestone streets of Diagon Alley, and laughter, real, unguarded laughter, filled the air for the first time in years. Yet Hermione Granger felt something missing in all that brightness. She had returned to her post in the ministry, to parchment and wand light and the steady rhythm of law. It should have been enough. The war was long over, the serpent's shadow broken, and the magical world, at last, at peace. But sometimes when the halls grew quiet and she caught her reflection in the window glass, she saw him, Draco Malfoy, in her memory's corner, standing beneath the storm, his gray eyes reflecting green fire. He'd left months ago, and the silence he left behind had its own shape. Hermione had tried to bury herself in work. She had risen early, stayed late, hunted relics that no longer whispered and artifacts that no longer stirred. Yet still, some nights she dreamed of the chamber and the heartbeat of the serpent beneath the stone. The sound had once terrified her, now it was strangely familiar. a reminder that some magic never truly died. On the first evening of July, as twilight spilled across the city, an owl came tapping at her window. Its feathers were white as frost, its eyes pale as smoke. She knew at once whose owl it was. Her breath caught. She unlatched the window and let the creature in. It landed on her desk, a small scroll tied to its leg, sealed with green wax. Not the mark of Malfoy Manor, but a new crest, a single feather, encircled by a serpent. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Granger, if you're reading this, then I've found it. Or rather, it's found me. I'm writing from the old ruins on the coast where the sea swallows the cliffs. There's something here, something that hums with the same magic we buried. I don't think the serpent was ever truly mine to end. Perhaps it belongs to all of us now. Come if you can. Or if you can't, remember this. When the world begins to fall again, and it will, don't look for light in the sky. Look for it where the shadows touch. D. Hermione read it twice, then pressed the letter against her chest. The ache that had lived in her since he left sharpened into resolve. She packed her cloak and wand before the ink had dried. The ruins stood where the cliffs met the sea, far beyond any apparition path. It took her a full day's journey by broom and spell to reach them. The sky darkened as she neared the coast, clouds rolling over the water like bruised silk. The wind howled through the arches of stone that jutted from the cliffs, remnants of a fortress long since claimed by time. "Draco," she called, her voice carried away by the sea. There was no answer, only the crash of waves below. She stepped cautiously through the ruins. Moss covered the stones, and faint traces of runes glowed in the cracks. The same serpent sigils that had marked every stage of their journey. Her heart beat faster. At the center of the ruin stood a circular dais, half buried in sand and seaweed. And upon it, as if waiting for her, lay another relic. Not gold or jeweled, but simple, a single silver pendant in the shape of a serpent, swallowing its tail. Hermione's breath caught. Ouroboros, the symbol of eternity. Behind her, a voice said quietly, "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." She turned. Draco stood in the shadow of a broken arch, his cloak dark against the wind, his hair tousled by the sea air. He looked older somehow, not in body, but in bearing. The haunted sharpness that had once clung to him was gone. What remained was calm. "I didn't think you'd stay in Britain," she said softly. "I didn't," he replied. "Not until I felt it again." He stepped onto the dais, his gaze on the pendant. This place was part of the Circle's making. Not a tomb, a foundation. The founders built Hogwarts from the remnants of these ruins. Slytherin's power came from here, from the sea. Hermione knelt beside the pendant, tracing its edge. "And you brought me here because it's waking again," he said. The waves crashed louder, and for an instant the runes around them flared green. Hermione drew her wand instinctively, but Draco held up a hand. "It isn't danger," he said. "It's memory. I think the serpent wants to rest. Properly this time." Hermione studied him, her mind racing. "Then we finish what we started." Together they raised their wands. Draco spoke first, his voice clear over the storm. "Sileo Aeternum." Hermione followed. "Lux Custodit." The runes blazed, circling the dais. The sea wind rose into a roar, and from the depths below a sound echoed. Not a hiss this time, but a sigh, long and low like the exhalation of the earth itself. The light faded slowly, leaving only the sound of waves. When silence fell, Hermione realized her knees were trembling. "It's done," she whispered. Draco looked out toward the horizon. "No," he said softly. "It's finally done." They stayed there until dawn, watching the sun rise over the water. The sky turned from iron to gold, and the world seemed to breathe again. Hermione sat beside him, their shoulders brushing lightly. "What will you do now?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Live," he said at last. Maybe that's all there ever was to do. She smiled faintly. "For someone who once thought happiness was a family crest, you've learned a lot." He turned to her then, his expression thoughtful. "And for someone who once thought reason could solve everything, you've learned how to believe." Their eyes met. The light between them was warm, real, not born of magic, but of something older and truer. The wind softened, carrying the scent of salt and dawn. Hermione reached into her pocket and pulled out the pendant. "It should be kept safe," she said. Draco shook his head. "No, let it stay here. Let the sea keep it. It belongs to the world now." She hesitated, then nodded. Together they placed it on the sand and watched as the tide crept forward slow and steady until the water took it, pulling it beneath the surface and out of sight. For a long time they stood without speaking, listening to the waves. Then Draco turned to her, his voice quiet but certain. "The serpent's circle is broken, but you and I—" He stopped, searching for the words. "We are what's left of it. The part that chose differently." Hermione smiled. "Then perhaps that's how the story should end." He glanced toward the horizon where sunlight broke through the clouds in radiant beams. "No," he said softly. "It's how it begins." And so when the morning came fully, they left the ruins behind, walking side by side along the cliffs, where the grass swayed like a green tide and the sea whispered beneath them. Behind them, the waves closed over the last trace of Slytherin's legacy. The magic slept once more, buried in peace rather than rage. And though the world would move on, and history would call them many things, hero and heretic, savior and sinner, one truth would remain unspoken, but known to them both: that while the world had been falling, when all else was shadow and ruin, they had chosen each other. And in that choice, something greater than victory had been born. Something like grace, something like love, and something like the first breath of a world made new.